Good morning, everybody. My name is Joe Bandel, and today we are going to be doing Anarchist Night Apprentice, Chapter 3, Into the Night. This is actually my first fiction book, and I've just rewritten it after I wrote it first about 25 years ago, and I've gone through and I've rewritten it largely because it's going to be a trilogy. So it's only available on a few places on the internet. I have not finalized the book yet, but it's here for you to enjoy. So I hope you enjoy it. This is part of my podcast episode, Deadly Days, Tales of Dark Fantasy. It's just a way of sharing something of my own creation for you. So I'm going to just dive into it. Chapter 3, Into the Night. He remained quiet, but inside he was seething and planning how he was going to exchange his Airbus ticket destination for old Seattle. That's where his parents had told him to go, and that is where he was going. Tobal Kane curled up in a dark corner of the Airbus and looked out upon a moonlit night. It was the 18th of February, and the full moon cast a soft light on the snow-covered landscape far below. There were no clouds, and he could see stars twinkling like diamonds in the night sky. It was one of those rare nights that you want to remember for the rest of your life. And he was trying to impress the smallest details onto his soul forever. He was leaving the only home he had ever known, and he was not going back. He felt the vibration and hum of the Airbus against his back. And below he saw the lights of New Rome growing smaller and receding into the distance. He was lost in his thoughts. The Airbus was relatively empty, and he was left to himself. It had been a simple matter to purchase his own ticket to New Seattle. There were no flights into Old Seattle, and that was the closest he could get. He simply booked a flight for a few hours later than the one he was supposed to be on. Uncle Harry hadn't even seen him off at the airport. He had sent the driver instead, and the driver dropped him off outside the terminal. Money hadn't been a problem since he had a spending allowance, and he had cautiously supplied himself with enough cash to stay for a week or two in Old Seattle if he needed to. Since he would be paying cash, Uncle Harry should never find out. He thought he had enough euros to cover any expenses that might come up. The euro was the global currency acceptable in all city-states around the world since the establishment of the Federation. He was carrying almost 5,000 euros and also had a credit card his uncle had given him for emergencies. As long as his expenses were reasonable, his uncle had always picked up the tab. Tobal was determined to find the antiquities shop if it still existed. He was also determined his uncle would never know about it. Nervously, he touched his jacket pocket and made sure the letter was still there. He could feel the weight of the medallion around his neck. Staring out the window into the night, Tobal thought about his parents, his mind churning with conflicting tales. Uncle Harry's account of their mysterious death by accidental drowning in a lake. The Time Knights claim they were alive and imprisoned, all against his vague, unproven memories. The Wild whispered through his doubts, urging him toward Old Seattle, a gift from them that relaxed him with its calm power. He hardly remembered them at all, just those faint memories without proof they were even real. They had been mysteriously killed when he was only 2 years old. His parents had been working on a classified project, but something had gone wrong and they never came back alive. Their bodies had been found floating in a nearby lake. The investigation had officially listed the cause of death as accidental drowning, even though his uncle said his parents were both strong swimmers. His uncle would never talk about his parents, and whenever Tobal asked, his uncle would change the subject. There was no one else that Tobal could ask. His uncle had known his parents and worked with them. He didn't remember his Aunt Lily, unless she was that woman he remembered swimming with Uncle Harry the day he had seen the tattoo. Uncle Harry wouldn't talk about her either. She had been killed in the same mysterious accident that crippled his uncle. It was all very mysterious, and now he was flying into the night, headed for some forbidden city that his parents wanted him to go to. It was the only thing they had ever asked of him. It was their dying wish, and he would do just what they asked. He fingered the medallion. There was a calm power coming from it that relaxed him, especially because it was a gift from them. The flight from New Rome to New Seattle was long and uneventful. There had been several stopovers at other city-states along the way. At last he dozed fitfully. The sky was getting lighter, but the sun was still under the horizon when he woke up. It was about 5:30 in the morning when the Airbus touched down at the terminal in New Seattle. Tobal got off at the Airbus terminal and asked directions at the information desk. He was only 2 miles from Old Seattle. After spending the night in the Airbus, the exercise and fresh air felt good. His clothing was warm enough as long as he kept moving. He had no luggage because his uncle had said he would be given everything needed at Heliopolis when he got there. The first part of his trip was easy since New Seattle was essentially one huge indoor complex. This was common with city-states. The entire city-state was essentially one giant self-enclosed structure. Public transit was small automated air cars that took passengers to any programmed address or destination. He was going to the south gate and punched the proper location into the control screen. "Please fasten your seat belt," said a pleasant mechanical voice from somewhere inside the car. Tobal complied and the car took off smoothly, entering a long corridor filled with other flying traffic. In a matter of minutes, his air car touched down next to the city gates and let him out. He watched as it sped away to pick up another passenger, then shrugged his shoulders and stepped through the gate into the cold air of Old Seattle. The light mist and fog felt chill in the pre-dawn air. He turned his collar up against the wind and fastened his light jacket a little tighter. As he walked, he buttoned the top button of his collar. The icy moisture seemed to seep into his bones. There was a dusting of freshly fallen snow on the ground, and it was very quiet as the sun peeked over the distant horizon. He guessed the snow would not last very long. It was already melting. While cold, it was still much warmer than his uncle's estate. Old Seattle differed sharply from New Seattle. He looked around curiously as he walked along an empty street. There were individual buildings on both sides as far as he could see. New Seattle had no streets. Anti-grav technology had made ground-operated vehicles obsolete over 20 years ago, before he had even been born. Still, here in Old Seattle there was foot traffic, and the streets were kept in repair for that purpose alone. The contrast between the two cities was almost overwhelming. New Seattle was a self-contained city-state like so many others in what was now simply the Federation. Some of the older citizens called it the New World Order, but it was not new any longer and did not seem to contain a lot of order. There were not many people still living that remembered the pre-Federation days. Each city-state was like any other with access to many of the same resources. Most people worked from their homes in private offices or lived within walking distance of the local manufacturing plants that produced the food and material products that kept the city alive. It was hydrogen cell technology that revolutionized the world, bringing cheap energy to entire communities. Almost overnight, the energy problems of the world were gone. There was abundant light, heat, and electricity within small communities, along with the technology to become self-supporting and self-governing. Anti-grav technology completed the isolation by making the world's ground transport structure obsolete. All across the Federation, streets and highway systems had been torn up and property sold or allowed to go back to nature. The majority of the world's population now lived in elaborate complexes, complete with local air terminals and food processing plants. There were self-sustaining apartments in self-sustaining complexes in self-sustaining city-states. You could find anything you wanted in your own complex, or order it from the Ethernet on your home computer. Hologram technology made communication and entertainment effortless. You could attend conferences, work, play games, or chat with your friends through the Ethernet, even if they were on the other side of the world. Advanced technology had finally reached the point where no one really needed to go anywhere. But here in old Seattle, there were still streets. Tobal had never seen a street before. It was like entering an ancient prehistoric world. In this part of the city, there were actually cobblestones that were over 200 years old. Definitely the old city was pre-Federation. The buildings were separate from each other and built of red brick or concrete. Many of the taller skyscrapers were in a process of structural collapse or in need of repair. It was the smaller buildings built of concrete and steel that seemed immune to the sands of time. They spoke of an era when life had been different, harder, and more individualistic. Ironically, it was modern technology that provided the power to support life in these ancient structures. Without the abundant heat and electricity, they would have long since been abandoned. It was as if people wanted to play at living in the past while keeping the niceties of the modern world at the same time. Tobal turned down another street, and old apartments loomed up silently on either side like a man-made canyon. The early morning sun had not made it into these dark canyons yet, and he walked in shadow. The light snow that lay on the cobblestones muffled his boots. The uneven surface made his footing treacherous, and several times he almost fell. Rounding another corner, he almost stepped on a couple of crows, intensely fighting over a dead animal. They hardly noticed and hopped to one side before resuming their fight over the grisly remains of a rat or a cat. It was hard to tell which. The street split in two separate directions. A battered sign said Oak Street and 30th Avenue. Going left on Oak Street, he headed down a street more narrow than the others. It looked like it was not used much anymore, but then they all did. Looking back, he saw the crows following him. They would fly a short way, stop to watch, and then fly again to catch up. Every now and then one would squawk and a fight would erupt, leaving loose feathers forgotten on the snow. Old Seattle was a noted artists' colony. It was one of the areas where society's fringe element escaped the rigid structure of modernization. Unique products, specialty shops, and services, both legal and illegal, were offered within the little shops that lined the streets. The owners lived above the shops and owned entire buildings. Some of the signs were broken or covered in grime and unreadable. He figured 2424 Oak Street should be a few more blocks up and on the right side of the street. A couple blocks further, he found it nestled between an old bakery and a barber shop. The dilapidated 3-story red brick building looked worse for wear than its neighbors, and some of the mortar between the bricks was missing. Tobal questioned the structural integrity of the entire building. A battered sign proclaimed, "Antiquities and Curiosities." The windows on all 3 stories were covered with wrought iron bars that looked functional as well as ornamental. They suggested what kind of neighborhood this really was, and he nervously glanced around him. The crows hopped a little closer. Stepping up to the door, he saw he was too early. The closed sign hanging in the window read the shop opened at 8 o'clock. Glancing at his watch, he realized he still had almost 2 hours to wait. Leaving the shop, Tobal continued down the street until he came to a small park area and watched the sun rise over the city. He brushed snow off a battered bench and sat, listening to the strange early morning sounds of this old city and watching the crows. One large crow actually flew onto the bench and turned its head to look intently at him. Tobal had the eerie feeling that the bird was intelligent. After a half hour of sitting in the small snow-covered park, the sun was up and he was thoroughly chilled. Going back to the coffee and bakery shop, he ordered a cup of coffee and a raspberry scone. It was warm inside and he stayed there until 8, listening to the locals and watching as they eyed him curiously. If anyone thought it strange to see a dark-haired 18-year-old with a scarred face wandering the streets at this time of day, they kept it to themselves. Tobal took his time and enjoyed his breakfast. There was some foot traffic in the morning streets, and most of it toward the bakery. Customers would enter, stomp their snow-covered boots on the floor, hang their coats or jackets on a stand, and sit down to read the local paper or talk with their neighbors. Most of them looked over 50 years old and dressed in outdated clothing. They were not a part of the modern world as Tobal knew it. At 8 o'clock, he paid for his coffee and scone and headed back to the shop. This time there was an open sign hanging in the window. In better light, the shop looked like a fortress. The heavy wooden door had metal bands across it for reinforcement. It looked like it could withstand a battering ram. He tested the latch, and the door opened silently inward on well-oiled hinges. A small bell rang as he entered. That's the end of this chapter, guys. Till next week. Thank you.